Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a huge puzzle, one that's right at the heart of our economies: government debt. It's the kind of thing that shapes headlines, elections, and pretty much our entire future. You see, economic textbooks give us some pretty clear guidelines on how to manage debt, the rules of the road for staying financially healthy. And yet, governments all over the world, it doesn't matter what their political stripe is, they just keep racking up these massive amounts of debt. So what gives? Let's dive into this. And this slide, this really gets to the heart of the problem. It's a tale of two worlds, right? On one side, you've got the economic ideal, this calm, long-term plan for stability. But on the other side, you've got political reality, which is more like a frantic, short-term scramble for votes and power. It's this fundamental clash between what makes sense on a spreadsheet and what gets you reelected. So this huge gap between the ideal and the real, well, it leads to something economists have a name for: deficit bias. Basically, it's this built-in tendency for political systems to spend more than they take in. And to really get why that happens, we've got to look beyond the numbers and dive right into the messy but totally fascinating world of politics. All right, so what are the political forces actually pushing this deficit bias? Well, our investigation points to a few usual suspects, these recurring patterns of behavior that just seem to encourage governments to borrow more and more. First up, and probably the most common culprit, is something called the political budget cycle. The idea here is pretty simple. The timing of an election can have a direct and, honestly, a pretty predictable impact on a country's finances. It's a classic four-step playbook, and it's super powerful. So picture this. An election is looming, and the pressure is on. What does the government do? It turns on the spending taps. We're talking tax cuts, new projects, all aimed at key groups of voters. The whole goal is to create this little burst of prosperity, this feel-good moment, right before people vote. Hopefully, it's just enough to win the election and worry about the bill later. And this quote really nails the core issue that the research points to. The way our election cycles are structured, it just incentivizes this short-term thinking. Winning today often becomes way more important than planning for a stable tomorrow. But hey, it's not just about winning elections. Political gridlock is another huge driver of debt. And there's a model that explains this perfectly. It's called the war of attrition model. Just think of it like a political game of chicken. Both sides know they need to make tough choices, spending cuts, tax hikes, but nobody wants to be the bad guy. Nobody wants to get blamed for the pain. So what happens? They dig in their heels, each side just waiting for the other to blink first. And while they're stuck in the standoff, well, that national debt clock just keeps on ticking up and up and up and up. Okay, so we've talked about the politics, but what are the real-world consequences of all this politically driven debt? I mean, this isn't just a number on some government spreadsheet, right? It creates real ripple effects that spread across the entire economy. And the sheer scale of the problem, it's just staggering. Just look at that number. In 2021, global public debt hit almost 98% of the entire world's economic output. Let that sink in. And this isn't some abstract figure. It has a very real, tangible impact on every single one of us. One of the biggest impacts is something called the crowding out effect. And this, right here, is why government debt is something everyone should care about, not just politicians and economists. So here's the bottom line. When the government goes on a massive borrowing spree, it's jumping into the same pool of money that private businesses need. It creates this huge competition for loans. And what happens when demand goes up? The price, in this case interest rates, goes up for everybody. That makes it way more expensive for a company to borrow money to, say, build a new factory, invest in new tech, or hire more people. The government, in effect, crowds out private investment. So, if politics is the problem, can we fix it? Can we design better institutions or rules to rein in these impulses? Is it possible to build some kind of fiscal guardrails to keep the whole system from careening off the economic road? Well, one of the most popular ideas out there is to use fiscal rules. Think of these as permanent constraints, like balanced budget laws or debt ceilings. They're essentially pre-commitments designed to tie the hands of politicians before they get tempted to spend. But of course, it's not that simple. These rules come with a major trade-off. The promise is great: more discipline, more credibility with markets, but the peril is just as real. What if a rule is so rigid that a government can't respond effectively to a huge crisis, like a pandemic or a massive recession? And let's be honest, politicians are really creative when it comes to finding loopholes. Which leads to another big question. Maybe the answer isn't just about writing stricter rules. Maybe it's about better governance in general. Less corruption, a stronger rule of law.
But when you look at the research, the answer gets surprisingly complicated.
And this is where we hit a really fascinating paradox. You'd think good governance is always the answer, right? And for the most part it is. It definitely helps private investment. But here's the twist. It also makes the government a better, more trusted borrower. And the unintended side effect of that? A well-run government can actually compete more effectively for those same loans, which could, ironically, make that crowding out problem even worse.
So, where does all this leave us? We've looked at the theories, the political games, the possible solutions. What's the final verdict here?
At the end of the day, the crucial takeaway is this. Massive government debt isn't really a bug in our political systems. In a lot of ways, it's a feature. It's the natural results of a democratic process where politicians are rewarded for responding to what voters want right now.
And that leaves us with one final, really provocative question to think about. It's this constant balancing act, isn't it? How much fiscal discipline are we actually willing to trade for democratic choice? The whole debate over public debt, it's really a debate over the kind of government we want. One that's responsive to us today, or one that's responsible for the generations of tomorrow. Where we choose to strike that balance, well, that's the question.